All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm the prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here at the Cap Wellness Center. And this podcast is all about helping you have a proactively healthy pregnancy so you can have a safe, gentle, natural birth. And that's going to allow you to bring your baby into the world that much more gently and healthily so you can start off your family experience more powerfully than if it's full of stress and trauma and other health concerns. So if you are a fan of this show and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Wherever you listen to your podcast, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an upcoming episode. And also, if you haven't rated or reviewed the podcast and you've enjoyed it and gotten value of it, that will really help me out because that'll allow this podcast to reach more and more parents like yourself that might be missing out on this type of information and helping them along their parenting journey. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you if you already have rated and reviewed. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about your birth story. This is something I feel is really important. It's something that here at the Cap Wellness Center and the birth classes that we teach, we spend time with our expecting parents to help them craft an empowering birth story before it's even happened, so it's even more likely to happen in the labor and delivery. But I also think it's really important after the birth to go back and relook at things, and telling your story about your birth can be really processing. It can help you process and heal. It can also be really empowering. And I found an interesting book. It's called Birth Your Story, Why Writing About Your Birth Matters by Jaime Fleres. And she's here to talk more about this. And she herself is a doula. She's also a writing professor. So she's combined these worlds really well to help women guide through a process to craft that story so it's an empowering one, it's a healing one, rather than all too often the birth story can be something that is depleting and stressful for a woman that prevents them from moving forward into parenthood as powerfully as they can. So I'm happy that she's here to share her wisdom and share the tools that she talks about in this book so that it can help you. So before we do that, though, let me pause, take a message real quick, and then we'll come right back to that. Hi, it's Dr. J, and I am so excited to announce to you that my new online program is now available. It's called Connecting with Baby During Pregnancy, and what it's going to do is going to teach you methods proven by the latest research in pre- and perinatal psychology and epigenetics that are going to allow you to have not only a calmer and more relaxed pregnancy and to have a gentler, more natural birth, but on the other side of things, you're going to feel more confident as a mom, and you're going to be able to soothe your baby that much easier, because when you're able to bond with baby and connect right now during your pregnancy, it's only going to translate on the other side to just being that much more connected and be able to help them calm and soothe. It's a really important thing. So head on over to drj.warren.com/CWB, that's Connecting with Baby, and you can learn all about it. Jaime Fleres is the author of the book Birth Your Story, Why Writing About Your Birth Matters. She is a mother, writing coach, former college professor, doula, holistic healer, and embodied movement teacher. She is the founder of Santosha Birth and Wellness and leads workshops and retreats internationally. So now let me switch over to my conversation with Jaime. All right, Jaime, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a great episode because I just personally, in the last couple of weeks and months, have been really interested in story myself. And Here you are with your book launch. It's called Birth Your Story, Why Writing About Your Birth Matters. And this is something that I know a lot of our listeners that have been exposed to other kind of birthing methods that might do pre-framing work around how you want the birth to go, but then also women who are finding themselves after the fact really trying to negotiate how the birth actually went compared to how they wanted it to. And also, just as your book is addressing, like, how do you dive into the story so it's healing and powerful, rather than what you end up kind of telling the story as a couple months afterwards that's good for dinner conversation, right? So
right.
Let's jump in. But before we do that, actually, let me have you tell our guests, how did you get to the point where you wrote this story about birth? I mean, you've been a writer for a long time. How did you get to now where you've launched this book?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, I've been writing personally since I was a teenager, writing to process my experiences, make sense of life, that whole thing. And then professionally, I've been a writer for many years. So I was a copywriter for over a decade, and I've been a writing professor at San Diego State and some other colleges throughout the United States. And then as I entered into my own motherhood journey, I gave birth to my daughter in 2003. And I really, I read a lot of birth stories while I was pregnant, and I was really interested in, the landscape of birth. And how women and men can have an empowering experience of birth. And so after giving birth to my daughter, writing her birth story felt like essential nourishment, like just something that had to be done in order for me to kind of make sense of what had just happened. And so I did write my story. And then I was active at a birth center where I was living, and I was a mom's group facilitator. And I also offered a workshop about writing your birth story, because it really blended, my two passions, which was women's experience, especially in birthing, and then writing. And so I started offering that workshop, and it was so powerful. It was so, it felt like such important work to come together as a community, as women, as, mothers, fathers, to make sense of birth, especially when it's fresh, but really anytime, because birth is so powerful and transformative. And the more that we can consciously reflect on it and digest it and process it, the more, like you said, we have this healing, powerful experience and powerful story, rather than just kind of, like you said, the social, like over the dinner conversation about what our births were like. So I was really inspired to write this book. Really, the key message is that our experiences of birth are important, and that through writing we can really, remember our stories, process them, heal them, and honor them for their powerful place in our lives.
Right, and that's what I love about your book. I mean, it is a really good blend of, the whys, why would you even want to write the birth story down? And I think that's where I want to start. But then also you interweave a lot of birth stories. So you see not only in a kind of writing example of it, but also stories of how things can go and have gone. But then also a lot of space for journaling yourself and kind of the questions prompting the process in case if you're left alone just wondering like, well, how do I even start this? I mean, I'm sure that's in your workshops the first place that women are might be blocked is like, how do I get started? I'm not a writer. How do you
Right.
work with people that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all come with, some of us are just, natural writers. And we're just really comfortable sitting down at a blank page and writing. But for the majority of us, and I know because I've worked with many, many students of writing, either inside the university setting or in my coaching practice, and, it is intimidating. We come with some of that baggage of like, are we going to do it right? Or how do I even start? And so I spend a lot of time in the book offering really like a menu of options for how to get started in a way that feels really accessible. So, you don't have to stare at the blank page. You can start by answering some questions, or you can connect back into your birth experience through movement or through meditation. And that there's lots of ways in so that when we actually write, it feels authentic, it feels nourishing, it feels doable, it feels good rather than like this daunting task. Because really, as new parents, we don't need another to-do. We don't need another like thing on the list. It's like we have so much to attend to, but I really deeply believe in this book really explores why it's so valuable to write our story. So it's really nourishment. It's self-care. It's really honoring our experience. And so in that way, it's more of a nourishing, like exciting thing to do rather than like a to-do on the list. Like, oh, I really should do that,
Right. And how sometimes our baby book feels like that as parents, where we have that every week we're supposed to write something great they did. And when we cut their hair and their first tooth lost, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't updated that book in forever.
Yes.
But with this, like, it can be so healing to, well, one, it's just an amazing time to just sit down and kind of decompress, potentially stressful. And even if the birth was a fantastic, beautiful event, then you can celebrate that. Do you find, when do you think is either the optimal time or, practically speaking, the best time to start working on that? Because as you said, when we first start as parents, the overwhelm of those first couple weeks of just might not be something where you ever get to this book on the bedstand. When do you find is typically the time that women go into it?
Yeah, definitely. I've worked with a lot of clients privately and some of the contributors of the book anywhere from their pregnancy, their time in pregnancy, all the way to like 20 years after their birth, almost 30 years after their birth. So there's really no like,
that long?
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, two of the people who wrote and contributed stories to the book, one wrote 17 years after the birth of his son, and the other wrote almost 30 years after the birth of her son. And they had some of the most profound transformations through writing because they had all this perspective from their birth. And that when they dug back into that, they realized some key pieces of their experience and some truths and some narratives that they weren't even aware of before. So I definitely say that the range of time in which you can write your story is really long. But I think it's helpful to have an idea. I think it would be helpful to read this book in pregnancy for a few reasons. One, the value of storytelling is so great. We hear, it's important for us to read about, what to expect during labor and what to expect in the different stages of pregnancy and postpartum. That's really valuable information. But stories offer us something that, kind of the basic factual information of birth can't always, which is kind of the deeper truths, some of the deeper parts of what we may experience or what birth can look like. And so it's nice to have that sort of connection to that in pregnancy. And then it also can just kind of help you prepare, like, in the postpartum, I know that it would be really helpful for me to take some notes. So that's what I would suggest as far as being in the postpartum is if you do want to write your story, even if you're kind of in the throes of this massive transition and you don't have hours to write, which many of us don't, can you at least start by taking some key notes? Because just the nature of our minds, we forget details. So can you write down some of the key things that were said or how you felt, or sort of start to map that chronology for yourself, just so you get some of those key facts down and some of those details that you don't want to miss, you don't want to lose, just because of the nature of the mind. So, so postpartum is a good place to at least start to make notes. And then, again, in the book, I talk about how to make a plan. So how to make a plan that actually fits your life. So if you are motivated to write it, how do you do that? Maybe you take some time, in the evenings after baby's gone to sleep, or in the mornings before they wake, or, you find those pieces of time where you can start to write. And it doesn't have to be done in one sitting. The book offers a ton of prompts that can be just like a paragraph or two, or, it has a whole guide that chronologically walks you through your birth. So you can just dive in and start answering some questions. And then when it feels good, you can really write that narrative.
And what comes to mind too is like I love writing, and that's a great way that I've learned to process things. But so I would gravitate towards doing those things. What would you say are the great benefits of writing that birth story to someone that writing is not, their cup of tea, and they wouldn't look forward to, carving out time that way? Like, what are those other benefits that would allow them to, jump into that writing process as I would imagine healing and as processing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I touched a little bit on just the nature of memory. So one of the things that writing our birth story helps us with is remembering. Not only do we get to capture and document those details of our birth, but it also, just the act of writing tells our brain, hey, this information is important. And so we tend to retain the details better. And then also, you have this record, this preserved memory that you can share with your children, you could look back on as they grow up, so we can write to really remember our stories. That's one reason. And then, like you said, processing. So, birth is intense, I think, for most of us, regardless of whether we consider it traumatic or whether it went how we wanted it to. It's a really powerful experience. And so, it can be a lot to wrap our minds around. It's something that primarily happens in our body, and it's really powerful and it's emotional. And so writing helps our minds kind of wrap themselves around our experience and create narrative. And, really as humans, we're narrative creatures. We look for the story. We look to make sense of it. So writing is just a natural way to kind of create that understanding of what happened to us. And then the other thing it helps us with is that it helps us discover. A lot of times we think we're just going to sit down and write something, and, we may not realize, or it may come as a surprise, that we actually learn a lot about our experience when we write. We discover a lot about how we felt and what was going on with us and what something meant to us, and so there can be a lot of discovery in the writing process, which can be so illuminating. And we need to digest our experiences, especially if there were intense elements, because if we don't, they kind of sit in our psyches kind of undigested, which can show up in other ways in our lives, and so definitely it kind of helps to clear and just digest what happened.
Because I see so many women postpartum that even though, as you said, the birth was powerful and on paper, a great experience as far as birth is concerned compared to how it could have gone, there is an element of like, whoa, that was intense. And there is a little bit of a deer in the headlights. Of course, the other women that are coming out traumatized because of something that happened along the way, whether it was an intervention or something that happened with the baby during the process. And I know that in my own experience, as far as like writing about events, there is something about seeing it on the page that transforms, and maybe not doesn't transform, but it allows you to observe it in a different way than being stuck in kind of the mental chatter and the mental space that can be associated. I don't want to say it's always traumatic, but that intensity in that kind of fight or flight sense allows it to brew in a different way than if you can see it on paper and then explore it newly, almost as an observer, and it's something, a story to edit. Is that how you start working, or how you like working with clients to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said was so well said and well articulated. I think, inviting in that witness is one of the elements of, the benefits of writing, where we get to, when we can sometimes have like a closed loop circuit in our brains about what happened. And it can actually get stuck, and so when we write, we can offer it to the page. We can offer it, outside of ourselves and begin to see it in a different way. So physically, it actually takes form outside of ourselves. And so we're able to reflect, and engage with it in a way that we couldn't when it's just in our minds or when we're speaking it. So I find that especially those who aren't feeling that movement of that energy, that emotion through talking about it or thinking about it, find that in their writing. They find those shifts. So writing can really shift how we engage with our stories, especially with trauma. Writing can't take away our pain, but it can definitely change our relationship to it.
Yes.
And I found in so many cases, and there's examples in the book of how much self-compassion and empathy and kindness one is able to give to themselves through this writing process. People who were hung up on like, oh, my last birth was traumatic and this one was hard. It's like they begin to see why, and they begin to see what was going on for them. And they start to really understand and like care for themselves. Like, oh, of course you felt that way, or of course this was what you experienced, and they begin to really give themselves that empathy and kindness that they need in order to heal.
Right. I can see the value too of couples working together on the birth story, because a lot of times I see, the mom has one version of it and the dad has another. And there can be, some conflict, some strife, like when storytelling happens of like, tell us how the birth went. And, clearly the experience of the birth was very different. And I would imagine for the dads, it would be really helpful to either work with those. Well, I don't know. Let me put it to you. Would you recommend them working on a story together, or is it better to work on separate stories and then come together?
Yeah, I think, I love that you brought this up, because sometimes we assume that when two people are in the same room that they're having the same experience. But I think definitely in birth, like that's further from the truth than even in other situations, because what's required of a woman in birth is so different than what's required by her partner. And so they are really having different experiences. And so I would really recommend that both the father and the mother, or the mother and the partner, really both take time to explore what their experience of the birth was. And I think it's so beneficial not only to write again, write for themselves, write what they really experience, and then come together and connect around it, because it can be such a good and powerful communication tool. I've talked to other midwives and practitioners who work with child, parents in the childbearing season, and I've seen it myself that it can be such an opening of communication, of empathy. When we share our stories with one another in our partnerships, we really get a sense of what was really happening inside the other person during our births, because we may miss that if we don't connect around it. We think, oh yeah, my wife had a great experience, but we didn't know that she was, experiencing this tremendous fear, had to conquer this big challenge, or something else was going on, something that upset her or whatever. And so, or something that she felt really empowered by, like, wow, I had this huge revelation about surrender, or about the power of creation. There can be some really big, sweet jewels that come through too. And so when each person gets a chance to write their story and share it with one another, it can be a real opening and a real connector between the parents as they move through and process their own separate journeys.
Right. And I've been seeing more and more so, like with working with the dads postpartum. The majority of my practice is working with postpartum women and the babies, but in my practice, like so many, thankfully, the dads are coming along. And just say in the initial exam of, say, the baby coming in after the birth, in telling the birth story in a kind of clinical sense, but it also is a way of processing. I'm always kind of assessing, like, dad, not version, but just like how they're relating to each other about the story. And I think in the past, I think the story about dads going through birth is like, oh, it's fine, like, baby's here and mom lived, and we're good now, like, oh, diapers, that thing. I'm seeing more and more that dads are traumatized from the birth, and they don't have a voice on, like, what to do about it. In the consultation room, dad saying, like, oh, it's good, and she did awesome, and the baby's great, those kind of things. But behind closed doors, if it's just me and the dad, and I give them the safe space of saying, like, so no, how did it really go? They're that protector that comes up in us, that feeling helpless and powerless, and like, what do I do? How do I help her? Do I stay away? Do I go in? And like, oh my gosh, we got rushed into this. I'm saying all of that because I've seen that a lot in the last little while, and so I'm hoping either a mom listening to this encourages your partner to do the work as well, or if you're a really engaged partner listening, know that it's important for you to process it as well, so that healing can happen around this, and then you launch off much more powerfully and strong, rather than those hurts lingering.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Because I really do think that fathers' stories are so valuable. And in the book, I have not only a number of stories written by fathers, which I feel like is it's a more marginalized voice in our birth story sharing culture. And I also talk about dad's experiences of birth, because I think it's just so crucial that we recognize, fathers really have a short history as far as humanity of being a part of birth. Right. It's new territory, developmentally or, evolutionarily speaking. And it comes with such a unique set of conditions and challenges for men, for fathers, and for partners. And so just like you said, not only is all of their experience of what it means to become a father, that is a huge piece in and of itself, is like becoming a father. Their issues with their own fathers are coming up, and how they were raised and how they want to do it differently and all of that. So that's present in this whole season of life. But then in the birth itself, they have to negotiate some really big challenges, like how to surrender, how to watch your partner, this person that you love more than anyone, bring your child who you love more than anyone, into the world. Like, these are your people. And so how do you surrender? How do you negotiate that relationship when they're birthing, when your partner's birthing? And then, how do you negotiate the birth environment, especially if you're being asked to advocate for your partner? Like you said, like that protector comes up. What was that like for you? What were you experiencing? As you move through this birth
behind
process?
You.
Yes, I know. Excuse me. I've got my big Newfoundland, making sure that we're safe here. Yeah, excuse me. So fathers have this unique experience of birth, and like you said, as far as I've seen, the rates of, men reporting trauma connected to birth is about on par with women's experience of trauma and birth. So men absolutely can have this really overwhelming experience. And I think, even as a society, we're coming along with men's expression of their experiences and, more beyond just like, hey, baby's healthy, mom's healthy, everything's good. It's like, well, there is a lot more underneath that, of what they're experiencing and what they have to process. So, I would say the whole book is for men too, but I do have a specific chapter that talks about men's unique experience of birth and then how they can move through writing. So I definitely suggest it as a resource for fathers as well.
Very good. Yes, I was really happy to see those father birth stories in there, and I myself have never written down my son's birth story. Being in the birth world that I am, I tell the story a lot, but I think there's value in writing as well. So in our closing minutes here, Jaime, tell people where they can get the book and other resources that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. The book is available on Amazon and other major retailers as an ebook and then also as a print book. And then you can also find me at jaimefleres.com, which is JAIMEFLERES.com. And the book is available there. And I also offer private coaching and editing for parents who want to dive into their stories. And so that support is there as well.
Great. And I'll make sure I have those links for you in the show notes and also on the website. We'll have those links so you can click right over either to get the book or to, connect with Jaime on her site. So Jaime, what in the closing minute here, what's the major take home that you'd like a listener, whether it's the mom or the dad, to take from what we talked about today?
Yeah, I think if I could have one single sentence or maybe a few strings.
You can have a few strings.
Short ones. I would say to mothers and fathers that their experience of birth deeply matters. It affects so many aspects of our lives moving forward after birth. And so your experience matters, your story matters, and your expression can be so empowering and so nurturing and healing for you as you move forward, regardless of what your birth looked like, regardless of how good of a writer you are. All of those things are pretty irrelevant. The process itself is really, really powerful and helpful.
Great. And what about for a little baby that might be listening? Either, they're here and they're listening while parents are listening to this podcast. What little words of wisdom would you like to whisper into their little ear?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is you are so loved. And then I'd also say, almost the same thing I would say to parents, that your experience deeply matters too. Even as a baby, that experience is, all of their experiences shape who they are and how they feel about the world. And so I would whisper into their ears that their experience is so valuable and that they matter.
Thank you so much, Jaime, for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your book. It's an amazing work. So congratulations to you and your launch. Good luck with all of your efforts to spread the message. And my listeners, please look into it. I think it's a great resource for you to just make your birth just so much more powerful because you're working with the story of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jay. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about this episode and other natural childbirth and parenting topics, please visit us at capwellnesscenter.com or message us on our Facebook page with any questions you might have. We here at the Cap Wellness Center look forward to helping you and your family be as happy and healthy as you can be.